Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Interpreter Hub podcast. As always, I'll be one of your hosts, Mark Rockford, the gentleman who is currently enjoying the nice weather in Mexico, right, where I am currently located. And then, of course, Mateos.
Hello everyone, Mateus here. Not enjoying as much as I wish I could, but the hot weather here in Brazil, it's very, very hot in Brazil today. Wish I were somewhere where the temperature wasn't burning me alive, but that's part of life, right?
It's either too hot, too cold. It's very ever Goldilocks, just right,
Yeah.
right? So, and then today joining us, we have the honor of having Kelly Gretsch, and I've told to Americanize this, Henriquez, right? So, Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and where you're joining this from?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, my husband and his family, they pronounce the last name the very Americanized way, despite the fact that my mother-in-law grew up in the Philippines and Spanish was one of her first languages, aside from Tagalog. But we're not here to talk about my mother-in-law, about me. I am a Spanish medical and healthcare interpreter, certified by CCHI and NBCMI, and I'm based in Richmond, Virginia, where right now it's a little chilly out. Um, so I'm wearing a sweater in my office. So
That's
yeah,
chilly for you.
yeah, good for me, right?
Amazing.
Very good. Well, Kelly is also, so long story short, she can go more into her background, but Kelly has been doing both on-site and remote interpreting. She came to remote interpreting, I'm going to say a little bit later than most. I believe you started with on-site, I'm say several years, not to go into it before you came into remote, but she's been very involved with the international community. Do you want to tell us a little about your involvement with international interpreters?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I just wanted a slight correction here. I only briefly interpreted remotely. So I am not currently interpreting remotely. I do currently interpret in person. But in terms of kind of connecting with the international interpreting community, aside from just interpreters in the United States, I run a lot of communities online for interpreters. And I think all together between like my Facebook groups, YouTube channel, LinkedIn, all of that stuff, we're looking at over like 20,000 people currently that I kind of manage in terms of communities. And so, in one of the main communities that I run called US Medical Interpreters, we have a lot of interpreters from outside of the United States. And I'll be completely honest with you, I had a lot of preconceived notions, excuse me, about interpreters outside the United States until I started talking more and more to interpreters based outside the United States, and began to realize that, we have similar issues, we have different issues, but at the end of the day, we're all colleagues. So yeah, it's really through those communities that I got to know more interpreters from outside of the United States and from outside of my state as well.
That's awesome. Do you want to would you care to debunk any of those preconceived notions, right? Because I feel like, and I'm just going to throw this out, there's a sweeping generality that most on-site interpreters in the United States kind of look down on remote interpreting, especially remote interpreters outside of the United States, right? I don't know if it's because, the modality, if it's maybe seen as a threat, or maybe it's seen as just not as good because it's not as personable. It's not, obviously you don't have that connection typically you do as if someone's actually in the room with you, right? Because we all know that actually physically being face to face or in the same room with somebody is a warmer, more personable experience, right? So what preconceived notions did you have and how did they change?
So, one of my first experiences encountering a remote interpreter was at a local hospital, and they had the interpreter on speakerphone in hospital registration. And the person speaking on speakerphone was, for lack of a better word, sounded like a no sabo. So for those of us who don't speak Spanish, no sabo is like someone who doesn't really speak Spanish. Maybe their parents speak Spanish, and they conjugate their verbs incorrectly, use a lot of like Americanisms, Anglicisms. And so when you say I don't know, you're supposed to say no sé, but no sabo is basically if you're following the regular verb rules, but it's kind of like saying it's broke did a little bit. And so the person interpreting over the phone was, and mind you, I'm a non-native Spanish speaker. But this person, it was just, I was like, wow, oh my gosh, this person can't really speak Spanish, and this is what they're relying upon as an interpreter. This person, and that really kind of set the tone for me. Like, whoa, like that just really surprised me.
Crazy. How many years ago was that?
That was back in like 2017, I have to say.
That's
Um,
surprising because I can like see that like a long time ago, right? But like,
mhm.
I feel like remote interpreting's really like come up quite a bit in its time of being in existence with quality and standards and whatnot. But that makes it sound like kind of scary. That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, and I actually, because I was familiar with the people who worked there, after I was done interpreting for the appointment I was interpreting for in person, I went and I asked one of the people at registration, like, so when you all have over the phone interpreters, like, what company do you use? Like, how do you do that? And it turned out it was a major language service company with which many people are familiar. I'm not going to name the
Yeah,
company.
probably.
That's
Um,
cool.
and so that just really set the tone for me. And, unfortunately, we base a lot of what we think about other people on our personal experiences, which may not be representative of all of those experiences as a whole, as reality, right? And now, of course, my perception on remote interpreters has changed drastically. And I have to say, a big part of that for me was not only getting to know remote interpreters, but also also doing remote interpretation myself. Um, Not to toot my own horn, but I feel that I am a good interpreter when I'm in person. But it was really challenging interpreting over the phone. And so that was like a slap in the face for me. And I firmly believe that in order to interpret remotely and be successful at it, you have to be more skilled as an interpreter because you're dealing with so many audio quality issues. You don't have that physical presence. And people treat you differently as a result. And I think a lot of those things, people tend to equate a lot of times remote interpreters with interpreters based outside the United States. And I think there's a lot of scapegoating of remote interpreters. You even see this with the national interpreting organizations. Sometimes some of the rhetoric that's used to describe remote interpretation borders on, if not completely crosses over into disparaging remarks about remote interpreters. And I think a lot of interpreters, when it comes to interpreters based outside the United States, a lot of interpreters are facing income insecurity. They're facing, sometimes decreases in their pay. And it's very easy to point at the interpreters outside of the United States and blame them for, oh, it's because you are agreeing to be paid so little that we're getting paid less. And I just don't think that's the case. I think we shouldn't be focusing on our colleagues who realistically, I think, don't have a lot of agency in these situations. And I think the focus should be more on the entities in the situation that have the power to determine these things. So
Wow. I mean, you got a lot there that we could unpack. So let's
I know.
let's start with quality, right? So like I am very pleased to hear you say that you think a lot of times that they have to be more skilled, right? Because you're right, they're dealing with, I could walk away from my mic and you wouldn't hear me, which would be the point, because there are providers that take the call, leave the speakerphone on the other side of the room, and just kind of wander around, and it's really, really hard to hear everybody, and then they get frustrated, and there's so many things that go wrong that have absolutely nothing to do with the interpreter, right? So there are definitely quality issues, but I would like to say, coming from the on-site world myself, before getting into remote, right? Like I feel like there's very little oversight on so many on-site interpreters, right? So I don't like there's no studies to say like which quality is really better, right?
Mhm.
Because yeah, it feels better because you got a nice looking interpreter who's well dressed, who's very professional, who shows up and is smiley. Of course that feels good and makes for a good session, right? As opposed to the person over the phone that's the cutting out on the speaker or whatever the case may be, right? Who might just be this really highly skilled, probably not dual cert like you, because not both certs are available internationally, which congratulations on dual certs, by the way. That's awesome. I wish, more people would take that route because it's the right thing to do, right? Um, but there's quality issues across the board. I think we could all agree in the profession that we're all doing the same thing though, and should have a minimum level of quality, whatever your modality is, whether you're on site, whether you're remote audio, whether you're remote video, whatnot, because at the end of the day, I really do believe that the interpreter's purpose is the exact same thing, right? It's there to be accurate, this, of course, going to be neutral and make sure the message is just completely gotten across as it was given, right? So quality. So have you ever seen the same thing with an on-site interpreter in terms of quality? And if so, how did you react or how did you handle the situation? Because that's tough, right?
I encountered this much later in my career, I would have to say. At least an example that's that extreme. I would say early on in my career, I think all interpreters kind of get this sort of imposter syndrome, especially if most of us are non-native speakers of one of our working languages or another,
By
right?
definition. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, unless you grew up completely bilingual, which I have been fortunate enough, my interpreter training was through someone who came up completely bilingual. But I think that's rare. And so I kind of lost my train of thought here, but
So you
sorry.
came across it much later in your career.
Yeah. And so I had this imposter syndrome. And then as a result of kind of being out there interpreting in person, that's an advantage of interpreting in person, is that sometimes you get to see other interpreters interpret, whether it be in hospital registration, in a waiting room before you go back. And so you get to kind of see how other people interpret. And that was a huge confidence boost for me because I was kind of like, oh, they're not like leagues and leagues better than me. And, so it leveled the playing field for me. But then a little bit later, I would say probably around like 2021, one of the biggest, most disturbing things I ran into was I'm going to try and keep the details light here because I would hate for someone to encounter this. And
Oh no, she's talking about me.
yeah, well, I encountered someone who was interpreting, and I try to be friendly. We very rarely have opportunities to interact with one another. And it was the end of one appointment, the beginning of another. And so I said, "Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm a Spanish interpreter. What language do you interpret?" We had a conversation, and it turned out that their training to interpret was a sheet of paper from the agency owner, and that the agency owner had recruited them to interpret because they quote unquote translated for their parents growing up. And, this person was quite young. And by no means am I trying to say that if you're young, you can't be qualified. However, this person was pretty young. So much so that they would probably not be eligible to even get certified or even participate in many interpreter training programs. And so they said to me that their training was a sheet of paper, and they kept on using the word translate, translate, translate. And then when I finally witnessed this person interpreting, it was omissions everywhere, using anglicisms, so using kind of like Frankenstein English Spanish words, to the point where the person receiving the message did not fully understand what was being said, and even looked at me because they knew me and I had interpreted for them before, even looked in my general direction, kind of confused. And yeah, that was my experience with an in-person interpreter, and I've run into a lot of those situations. And I just want to make it clear that I don't blame that interpreter for being in that position, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think just kind of based on my knowledge of the details of the situation, it seemed like the agency owner was trying to recruit people for as little money as possible as a middleman with a larger agency, being a subcontractor. Just trying to fill that appointment with what I like to call a warm body. So,
No, that's extremely common for remote interpreters. And it leads me to a question that I have for you, Kelly. I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you went through 260 hours of training before you got your first assignment. That's much more than the average. And I wanted to ask you, so what was driving you that deeply to attend so many hours of training before you start interpreting?
I didn't know that 40 hours was the minimum.
Nice.
Oh my goodness, this is kind of like a slightly long story. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I wanted to go to school to be a social worker. And I went to Virginia Commonwealth University, or VCU, here in Richmond. And I wanted to double major in Spanish and social work. And they said, you can't declare social work as your major until your junior year. And so I got to my junior year and I'm like, okay, I want to add social work as my second major. Spanish was my first major. And they said, no, you can't double major with social work. You have to choose between Spanish and social work. And I said, okay, fine, I choose Spanish. I'll come back for my MSW later, which I never did, by the way. And I found out about this program at VCU called the SETI program, the Spanish English Translation and Interpretation Program. And I had been through some Spanish classes and I didn't feel like it was really pushing me. So I went through the SETI program in hopes of improving my Spanish. And it turns out that through that program, I discovered my love of interpretation. So it was actually a degree level program through VCU. So I had no idea that 40 hours was considered generally like the minimum requirement for medical interpreters, and medicine always interested me. So yeah, I hope I kept that succinct enough.
Was good. I'm going to jump back to something you said earlier, right? Because it's a trigger word in, I think, in our audience, right? And you said interpreter pay, right? Um, so
Problem.
yeah, I want to discuss that. I mean, the rates can be low. We all agree, right? I also think they can be low for on-site interpreters, right, as well, because what a lot of people like, I love people that do math and whatnot, and like one of the first interpreters I worked with had a little Excel sheet where she literally calculated for on-site assignments. She literally calculated with her 2 hour minimum, she got paid her 2 hour minimum,
Mm-hmm.
with the time in traffic, with gas, with wear and tear on her car, with everything else that was involved, right? Like what she was making per hour. And of course, you're like, oh, you're making X. And she's like, no, I'm not. Look, with the formula and everything, I'm making way less, right? My point being that way less at the time was like twice minimum wage, right? Which, eh, eh, not great, right? But at least it's something. And I know I'm gonna get roasted for that comment, but it's if it gets your foot in the door and it's doing something you love. Look, I was a teacher, right? I knew I was never gonna make. I was not gonna be a millionaire teaching, right? Like you can become a millionaire and be a teacher, but you rarely become a millionaire because you're a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, right? Same thing with interpreting. I think a lot of people do it for love. But where I'm going with this for the pay rates for on-site, you've been in this for a while. What have you seen with the pay rates in your area and nationally for on-site folks?
Going down,
Why do you
going
think
down.
that is?
I think, there's a lot of different variables that play into it. I definitely think COVID played a huge role in this. I lost my main contract at the beginning of the pandemic, um, and that was about 86% of my business. And I had to rebuild my business from there, which I did successfully. And I was relied upon quite heavily as an in person interpreter during COVID, as an I was one of maybe a handful of interpreters still interpreting in person. And I was getting back to back to back assignments, developmental behavioral pediatrics, which I loved. But then the second the pandemic kind of eased up and interpreters were starting to interpret in person again, I got a lovely communication from one of my main agencies that I almost single handedly supported in my area through my work. during the pandemic. I firmly believe I kept them in business in this area. And they sent me an email saying, as if they were doing me a favor, they were going to reduce me to a 1 hour minimum and increase my pay, which would have effectively reduced my pay by about 33%. That spreadsheet person that you mentioned, I think we would be best friends because I love spreadsheets. And so I think COVID had a huge role to play in that. A lot of clients switched to remote and never went back. And in addition to that, of course, we have AI. I also see rampant lack of compliance with language access laws in healthcare by medical providers. Widespread use of Google Translate, widespread use now of AI, even though those things are against Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. And, I think a lot of it is also political. The party that we have in power kind of determines enforcement actions, how likely it is that things are going to be enforced, and how likely it is people are going to report issues as well. I know a lot of people right now are kind of like, what's the point of reporting? Because of the current political climate, which I can honestly understand to some degree.
Yeah.
So lots of different variables. I named just a few.
That's a great segue then into you recently or off camera were telling us you attended an event. Can you tell us what event you attended? Tell us the importance of the event. In a context, that would be wonderful about what is happening in the United States currently. And then your thoughts on what happened at the event.
Yes, so I went to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights briefing on language access for individuals with limited English proficiency in Washington, D.C. on Friday. I think it was the 21st or the 22nd?
21st.
Okay,
so
21st.
Hot off the press, guys. She just got back.
Yes, I did. And basically, it's my understanding that because of the recent executive order declaring English as the official language of the United States, this also repeals Executive Order 13166, which basically you have Title VI that says, okay, you can't discriminate against people based on national origin. This includes their ability or inability to speak English. Executive Order 13166, not to be confused with Order 66, which ordered the extermination of the Jedi. I would always say that in my classes, but it explains the how to provide language access, to what degree. And by rescinding this executive order, it rescinded 25 years of guidance on providing language access in the United States. And so it's my understanding that this briefing was kind of they kept on honing in on, okay, we need input from the public because the Department of Justice is going to issue new guidance. And we want to hear different perspectives. And so that to me is kind of like the why about this briefing.
Awesome. Can you tell us any of the stakeholders that were there?
So Bill Rivers was there. Bill showed up and I was like, hey, Bill. I honestly don't think Bill knows who I am. So I'm sorry, Bill. And we had two people give their testimony towards the end who were people with either family members with limited English proficiency or at one point in time had limited English proficiency themselves. I believe 4 people were slated to speak, but only 2 felt safe enough to show up, which was reported by some of the commissioners. There were also, I believe, people from different hospital systems in the United States as well who were in charge of language access programs. There were, of course, there was a gentleman I ran into from a nonprofit organization who tried to make the argument that Title VI does not include your ability or inability to speak English. So there were, I think, 3 panels with at least around average like 4 people on each panel. And then people at the commissioners would speak as well. I don't have my notes up in front of me, and I still have to revise my notes. I'm actually planning on recording a video about it today. So you caught me a little off guard on that one.
No, I mean, so this is great prep work then for your video, right? So it helps put your thoughts in order. Um, I mean, I could definitely elucidate a little bit here, but let's talk about why is that important to our audience, the remote interpreters? Like, why should they even care, right? Because English has always been the most prevalent language. No, not always, going back several hundred years. Okay. There's always a caveat, right? But for quite some time, English has been the most prevalent language in the United States, but we've never had an official language, right? And so, why should it care? What's it going to affect our?
I think I can only answer for myself. Like, why do I think this is important? I think the current administration has set a very clear intention that language access is a target. And we need to understand. Okay, now I'm going to, okay, what we need to understand as interpreters and translators and linguists in general. We need to understand that our work is inherently political, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion being targeted. This can impact language access, which means that, as you mentioned earlier, many of us do what we do because we care about the communities that we serve. I firmly believe that in our capacity as interpreters, we serve the limited English proficient community as spoken language interpreters, and then sign language interpreters serve the deaf and hard of hearing communities, or even deafblind communities. Um, and that is also something that has been a focus of this administration, whether directly or indirectly. So our work is inherently political, and obviously we care. Many of us, not all of us, and that's okay, care about what we do. And if we want to continue doing what we're doing and make money doing what we're doing, we should care about this. We should be submitting comments because I did find a lot of the commissioners and a lot of the people that even gave testimony, there was a certain level of, I suppose you could say, lack of knowledge about some of the finer points of language access that all of us kind of take for granted. And so I think informing people who are making the decisions is super, super important. And that's a role that we can play. And it's ultimately for self-preservation, I think, if you want to continue having work as an interpreter.
That perfectly said it right back at the end, right? Like, so we have the right thing to do, which is pay attention and speak out, right? As you're saying, but also your livelihood depends upon this, right? So
Mm-hmm.
even with 25 years, I believe, the 1336 was started by, I'm off the digits, was started by Clinton, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So it's been in effect for quite some time. But even with that, like we've seen a slow growth and not always equal enforcement of usage of qualified interpreters, right? Which is what the language says, qualified interpreters, because they'll often use before family members, children, the janitor, whoever happens to be close by, right? And now, like you said, they're using Google Translate, which might have its place, but probably not anywhere close to medical interpreting, um,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then AI. So uh, there's all these pressures, right, on this industry that does so much for so many people, and at the end of the day, also pays your bills. Like that's what you, if you're working remotely, internationally, right? Whether they're, we talk about the low rates or not, like this is people's livelihood at the end of the day, right? So we need to care because we might have 4 lost years. We might have 4 years where the language industry, I'm going to say the language is just kind of like, it'll be there because there are lots of people that will
Mm-hmm.
still continue access because it's the right thing to do, right? But without any enforcement of a regulation or rule that didn't have any teeth anyway. ADA has teeth. The Americans with Disabilities Act has teeth. There are fines, there's stuff. But unfortunately, yeah, some of the others don't have as much teeth. And if now there is zero enforcement, which I think is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? Like, if not blatantly, like, do what you want. We don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, this could affect people's volume, people's livelihood, the number of refugees coming to the United States who depend upon these services, the number of people that are already there that might have come in as refugees or immigrants that also depend upon these services because you need to speak English in the United States. There are so many places where you can get by in your native language as your main language, which is fine. And then English can be your second language. And yeah, like there are places that you will need it, right? But that diversity is, I'm going to say, what America has been built upon, and this executive order seems to kind of fly in the face of that, guys. So like, I don't want to spread doom and gloom. It's all over. No, the industry is going to be here. You're going to continue to have work if you're good at what you do, right? You should always have work if you're good at what you do. But because there's a lot of, as you said, a lot of the stakeholders that showed up, they are from language, from hospitals and systems that realize a significant portion of our population, the patient population, needs these services to keep showing up, right? They are US citizens, they are US legal residents, and they need these services. And we get paid for the, not the interpreter themselves in most cases, but they, obviously the hospital makes money off of the treatments that they're providing to these people, right? So, you know, while it may sound scary, I don't know, Kelly, is my thesis right? Like the industry is going to continue, but it's not, maybe not going to grow as fast, or maybe it might even decline a little bit over the next 4 years.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I'm of the same mind. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of cost-cutting measures, and a lot of that is kind of driven by, okay, how low can we set the bar and get away with it? And so I have seen, especially for myself, and I also, I talk with many other interpreters. I always like to say I'm kind of like, if anyone's ever seen Game of Thrones, like Varys on Game of Thrones, the Master of Whispers. I have people in my inbox all the time just like tell me like, hey, did you know this is going on? Hey, did you know this is going on? And so I'm hearing from a lot of people, especially a lot of interpreters who I consider to be very, very talented, like, hey, my workflow isn't, business is kind of going down. Whereas I am hearing from, and it's a mixed bag, from other interpreters who, may have less training, oh yeah, my work's going up. And again, it's hard to tell if that's anecdotal or if it's actually representative of the group as a whole. But I do kind of anticipate that if it is a trend, continuing to move forward.
That makes total sense. Let's move on to something a little bit more positive. So one of the groups that Kelly runs is an interpreter peer support group. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's actually the interpreter and translator peer support group. And it is for, oh my goodness, in-person interpreters, remote interpreters, US-based interpreters, non-US-based interpreters and translators, for spoken language interpreters, for sign language interpreters. And it initially started back in 2020. I was running a group called US Medical Interpreters. And right now we're almost at about 10,000 members. I am, yeah, I am the main active member of the modmin team. So I'm a moderator. I'm not an admin of the group. And back in 2020, when everything kind of went to hell in a handbasket, sorry if you have to bleep me out.
4-letter words are fine.
Yeah.
They have their place.
Okay. I know we briefly talked about that. I can be a sailor sometimes. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything kind of went down, it was like people were looking for someone to turn to. I think that's what it was, because that's when I started having a lot of people in my inbox. And a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen to my job? Or I just lost all of my assignments. All of my pre-scheduled assignments are gone. Call flow is zero. The company's lowering how much they're paying me. And I even had people, I unfortunately did have someone threatening self-harm in my messages, and I had to handle that. And it became really, really clear to me that a lot of people, myself included, were just, our mental health was just so on edge. And that's what really inspired me to start the Facebook group, Interpreter and Translator Peer Support Group. I also started my YouTube channel as a result of that, because a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, my skills, what's going to happen to my interpreting skills? And so I started preparing interpreting practice scripts so people could practice their skills while they weren't actively interpreting. And from there, we evolved into a Facebook page with like a public kind of arm where we could keep the conversation about interpreter and translator mental health going. And we also have a LinkedIn page and that's really active. I love to see how the LinkedIn page has really blossomed. Just in a professional space, keeping that conversation about mental health at the forefront, at least getting people thinking about it. So yeah, that's kind of how the group started, why the group started. And we now have live support groups over Zoom. We started those, I believe, towards the end of 2020. And we're having an event on April 4th. It is emotional first aid for interpreters and translators, run by our presenter is going to be the lovely and amazing Flor Montero, who is a conference interpreter and also a psychotherapist. So yeah, we're doing stuff.
That's awesome. That's a great initiative because I mean I've seen posts and we've all kind of been there, and that interpreters are treated as machines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody on the other end of the line, right? Maybe you got a name, but I don't know that they always really care, unfortunately, right? So it's nice to be part of a group where other people are going through what you're going through, probably have gained at least some measure of resilience and have tips and tricks to share that resilience with you, right? Because, I mean, this is, at the end of the day, it's a personal field. As much as we push that you're a business, this is an industry, and you got to have a bunch of skills, there's somebody between these, right? And the way you feel, is obviously going to affect how you interpret, right? So the fact that you can talk to Kelly and talk to other people in the group and share whatever you're going through, I'm going to guess that it's not all necessarily interpreter related, but like it's by interpreters, right? Like, so, I think that whole building a community, which amazingly enough is right up what we're doing as well, right? Building a community, right? Because community is important, right, for the human race and all of us in general. So that's awesome. Can you give it a plug? Can they just Google, interpreter peer or interpreter, what is it? Peer interpreter and translator peer support group and find you, or what's the best way to find you?
It should come up. I actually have never Googled us before. So right now it's a web page on my website where I kind of have the links to the group, the Facebook page, our calendar of upcoming meetings. This year I am hoping to get our website up. I'm doing like 1,000,001 things, so I'm working on it. But if you go to my website, kghinterpretation.com, so that's my initials, Kelly, Gretch, Henriquez, KGH, interpretation.com/peer support. So it's P as in Peter, E as in elephant, E as in elephant, R, S, U, P as in Peter, P as in Peter, O, R, T as in Teresa. That's how you get there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that is a great initiative, like I said, and we do encourage you to take advantage of that or another community, right? Because trying to do this by yourself is tough, and while it can be done, there's something to do, right? So, is there anything you want to share about the group? Maybe you've heard, I don't know, like feedback on how it's been impactful to its members?
Yes. So we've definitely had some folks come to our meetings, and they come there, and a lot of times people will be down. They come to the meeting, they're down, they're stressed. And a lot of times, by the time people leave the meeting, we're all smiling, we're all laughing, we all get to know each other. And this even happens on our Facebook group as well, or even on the Facebook page. People will share things and then other people will chime in. So it's a really great way to connect to other people as human beings, not just as Google Translate robot, like I think another great thing about the group is that it's really changed minds about what we talked about in the beginning, those misconceptions. The only way you can overcome these misconceptions about, if you're a remote interpreter with respect to in-person interpreters, if you're an in-person interpreter with respect to remote interpreters, if you're an interpreter and translators, bridging those gaps, US-based interpreters and non-US-based interpreters, that's probably where I've seen one of the biggest impacts is you come into a meeting and people can sometimes be a little adversarial. Oh, you're, where are you at? Where are you? Oh, you're in, country outside of the United States. Oh, okay. They'll roll their eyes and kind of be like, eh. But then by the end of the meeting, after we kind of share and we're able to empathize a little bit, people kind of walk away like with a new appreciation, seeing that other person who they were othering before as more of a colleague than, someone that they need to butt heads against, which I love that this is happening through the group, and it's happening to me too. I connect with other group leaders who are based outside the United States, and we develop friendships, and then our friendships kind of, for lack of a better word, infect other people, and then other people are starting to, it's great getting connected, because I feel like a lot of us are independent contractors, and just by the nature of being contractors, there's so much distance between us. So bridging that distance, I think the more we're able to come together, the more we're able to kind of work together on a more positive future for our profession.
Talking about the future of our profession, I have a question since you talk with a lot of interpreters. Do you ever feel threatened by AI in the next years that we will have right now? Or do you hear comments from your interpreter colleagues about AI? What's your general perception?
So there's my personal perception and there's what other people say. My personal kind of perception on it is that what we're seeing right now with AI is kind of like a fad. Like, I do agree that AI is here. It's here to stay. AI isn't going anywhere. But like, I was telling someone the other day, like, do I need AI on my refrigerator? Do I need, it's like everything is, my husband is like, he's like, I don't want a smart TV. Okay, our TV is a smart TV. It's not going to connect to the internet. It doesn't need to connect to the internet. That's what we have. Why does your doorbell need to connect to the internet? All that stuff. And I'm kind of seeing that with AI. Like, they're putting AI in everything. And not the ecological impact of AI aside, which I think is completely unsustainable. I think we're going to slowly but surely see AI narrowing a little bit more. And people are already kind of realizing AI doesn't do all the things that a lot of people are claiming that it can do, at least not reliably. So I think we're going to see an initial, just like we did with Google Translate, we're going to see an initial kind of like, oh, this thing's great, and letting go of clients and things like that. But then I think it's going to kind of come back around. Not everyone's going to pick back up, human interpreters and translators, but I think there is going to be a little bit of a reckoning down the road. And the opinions I see from other interpreters and translators is pretty split. Usually people kind of take one extreme or the other. Either I'm not worried at all, or, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job tomorrow. I need to learn to do something new and go into a different career field. So I kind of take like a middle. I always try to find a nice balance in the middle. And I think, yeah, everything I just said.
That's nice. Yes. It's all about balance, right? And I have another question for you here. I know that you have dual certification. Is there anything that you feel is lacking when it comes to certification? Do you really feel like they make you ready for real life challenge? Is there anything else you would like them to change? Maybe more practice? What would you say about the certifications?
That's a really good question. There are different considerations. So I'm certified by the National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters, or NBCMI, and the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters. So I can only really speak on medical healthcare certification. And both of those certifications have kind of different pros and cons, different considerations. I think in general, it's a much better metric than a lot of the kind of like tests that you get from interpreting agencies. Because before I was certified, I had to take those, and they would just like get me to like explain my, like, what my ideal vacation was and things like that. It was just like so superficial, and it wasn't really focused on interpreting skills. It was focused more on bilingual ability, whereas the certification exams are focused specifically on interpreting skills. I think they could be harder, honestly. Because I was like super hyped up about the exams, took the exams, and I was like, that wasn't that bad. It was much easier than some of the things I've actually had to interpret. So I think they could be a little bit harder. I really love what CCHI is doing right now with their language neutral exam, the core CHIP. I think that's really awesome. And if you haven't read their study about it, read their study, because everyone at CCHI knows when I first saw the English to English exam, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that sounds really silly. Like, they know this. They know. But then when I actually read the study and I've spoken back and forth with them, I'm kind of like, this is legit. This is legit. Which I
It's
think
a
is really
sweet idea.
shocking.
Let me jump in to let everybody know what it is. So the E2E, or as it's evolved, basically they want to test the skills that are adjacent to interpreting, right? The things that you need to, it's like, can this person walk? Well, let's see what muscles they use, right?
Mhm.
So, the whole idea is to, because if you don't know, creating a certification exam by language is time consuming and costly. So
Yes.
to create one for every single language and or dialect out there would be, well, incredibly time consuming and costly. So the idea is to at least test things like, the ability to paraphrase, memory, comprehension, production, et cetera, of things that are relevant. Because if you can't even do that, and take those skills and put them together, then you're probably not going to be a very good interpreter either, right? So it's taking those composite skills, kind of one by one and testing, if that makes sense.
I would say one more thing about the certification exams as well, which is that it's really unfortunate that, like, I just plugged CCHI and I love CCHI, but it is really unfortunate that cost often serves as a barrier to many interpreters, especially interpreters outside of the United States, who sometimes are making, oh my gosh, it just breaks my heart every time I see sometimes how little interpreters are earning. And another thing too is, for what, I'm not going to, I guess, name the certifying body, but for one of the certifying bodies, in order to get certified by them and take their oral certification exam, you have to travel to the United States, which just astronomically
It's a huge
increases that
barrier.
cost. So that's something I would change. Let them take it online, please.
That would be amazing. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about for the industry trends? Just kind of as a closing question, you can give us some kind of message of hope or talk to getting started in the industry or people that are working, any message you might have for the international remote folks that are the majority of our listeners.
Well, I wrote down kind of like 3 tips, because you said, I have my notes right here. You said tips and tricks, nuts and bolts, no generalities. I do have 3 tips for taking care of your mental health as an interpreter or a translator.
Awesome.
Tip number 1 is that self-care is an everyday thing. You got to take care of yourself, especially if you're doing this because you care about the community. You have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can help anyone else put their oxygen mask on. I find that this app that I use every day, it's called Finch. F as in Frank, I, N as in Nancy, C as in cat, H, Finch. It's like a fun little app where you can take care of, like, they call it a burb. So it's like a little bird, and you can dress it up with little things, but you earn things for your bird by doing your self-care activities every day. So it helps building that routine. So self-care is an everyday routine. It is an everyday thing. And then having a plan for self-care. If you have a difficult assignment, if you're facing interpreting or translating even traumatic content, what's your plan? Who are you gonna call? Ghostbusters? No. Who are you gonna call? What friends specifically? Have that person you can reach out to. And if you don't, connect with other people. Even if you do, connect with other people, and connect with people who are different than you. Connect with not just interpreters, translators. Connect with people who interpret different languages than you. Connect with, if you're a spoken language interpreter, connect with sign language interpreters. One of my best friends is a sign language interpreter, and my life is so much better having them in it. And connect with interpreters who aren't based in the same country as you. If you're inside the United States, connect with interpreters based outside the United States. And I truly think that this is not only the key to improving our mental health, but also I think it's going to lift up the profession as a whole, and help us kind of troubleshoot and work through things together as colleagues and not see one another as, diametrically opposed, kind of like enemies or competition. So yeah, that's all I want to share.
Awesome. Well, we greatly appreciate you coming on. This has been a bit of a different episode because we really wanted to focus on, well, trends, honestly, and members as people too, because we often get reminded, hey, Mark, I've got a heart, right? I am a person here, right? So we appreciate that. So thank you so much, Kelly. And again, you can find her on her own YouTube channel, on her own LinkedIn, and managing over 10,000 people. That's crazy. That's congrats to her. Moderating over 10,000 people on Facebook. So, I don't think it'll be hard to find.
Yeah, links are going to be on the description as well, so that'll be very easy to find.
Awesome. Well, that closes out our episode. Thank you so much, Kelly. Really appreciate
Thank you
So much.
having
Bye.
you here.